Thank you for being here. We are gathering from different parts of the world in this meeting. Thanks for those who are coming to listen and discuss with us at this late hour in the panel on Spatiality, Care and Control 2, Academic Allyship. And all panelists, we all are activists, scholars, direct witnesses to a series of border violence being produced by a combination of colonial, racist and capitalist structures and relations working to maintain global inequalities. And our combined papers are complemented and enriched by evidence and testimonies aim to show possibilities of allyship between activism and academia in support of migrant justice. And so we will critically explore possibilities and challenges to allyship and solidarity faced to these multiple border violences. Francesca Esposito will open the panel and outline this violent scenario in Portugal in the realm of the COVID pandemic. And then Moshood Olanrewaju ask how is the specificity of the local story relevant to the border meaning and operation of the human condition. So he elaborates on the racist violence against illegalized African migrants at the Mexico-United States southern border. And Dora Rebelo offers a reflection on allyship and accountability in migrant justice activism based on her fieldwork in Europe and asking critically, it's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life, but for whom? Then I myself, I'm contributing a counter mapping of systems of care and care in the Aegean Islands. And so knowing that we're very late for Australian time, we try to first keep our contribution short, but then also as a surprise that will refresh the attentional span at the last contribution will be a collective work of Francesca, but together with Armitt, Aminata, Kalokoh, Angela Obi, and Charly Waters, closing the panel using an animation as a tool to expose the violence of the detention regime. And yeah, thanks for being here. And so I'd like Francesca to hand the word over to you and open the panel with your contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for the amazing introduction. And thanks also to the organizers of this amazing conference. It's a pleasure, an honor to be here and to be in conversation with you and also to be in conversations with my fellow panelists, comrades, colleagues who are here. I'm really looking forward to exchange ideas, insights and experiences on these important topics. I've shared my slides. Let me know. Can you? Oh, no. Oh, sorry, but I'll have to do like this so that I can also keep some notes for me. Do you see the presentation if I do it like this?
Yeah, I think we can see it. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, that's great. So my presentation today for this panel is entitled Immigration Detention at Times of COVID-19, a Case of Collective Amnesia or a Politics of Erasure, and is an expansion of a piece that I wrote last year with my colleague Sofia Teles, and which was published on Le Monde Diplomatique Portuguese edition. And in this paper, somehow we argue that while COVID-19 was ravaging around the world, Portugal came at the center of international news for what most have wrongly defined as the regularization of undocumented migrants, which overall worked to strengthen the forward-thinking image of the country and further consolidate a long history of self-promotional narratives, state-crafted narrative of openness, generosity, and hospitality of the Portuguese stated institutions. However, on another side of the story, an antithetical one was not being told, or better, erased by from public debates. And this side of the story has to do with the fact that people racialized or ascribed as foreign nationals continued throughout of the pandemic, or better, syndemic, as I prefer to define it, to be detained in immigration detention, despite calls by activists and civil society groups to release them freely into the community. This is one of these calls that was published in the Expresso's newspaper, and I was amongst the people who proposed, wrote this open letter, which saw 41 associations and more than 100 citizens asking for the release, immediate release of people from detention centers. So the violence of the detention regime and the Portuguese border regime more broadly emerged in a particular chilling way in March 2020, so at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, with the death of an Ukrainian man, Ihor Igomeniuk, inside the Lisbon detention airport facility. This news, however, did not receive the same attention on international media platforms as the issue of the falsely, wrongly defined migrant regularization. So with a biometric passport and a valid work permit for Belgium, Ihor had traveled from Ukraine via Istanbul and arrived in Portugal on 10th of March 2020. Since 2014, Ukraine and Portugal, via the European Union, had been developing new bilateral agreements, which culminated in 2017 in the implementation of a Schengen Area Agreement, whereby Ukrainian citizens with biometric passports became entitled to travel to Schengen area countries, visa-free for stays not exceeding 90 days, and job seekers still need a visa to enter member states where they intended to seek employment. So although Ihor had all the necessary documents to enter Portugal and continue his journey to Belgium, he was stopped, searched, and refused entry by Portuguese border control officers. And he was detained in Lisbon airport detention centers while awaiting a flight to deport him back to Turkey, Istanbul, from where he was flying from. However, still in the custody of the SAF, also of Portuguese immigration authorities, just 2 days later, on 12 March 2020, Ihor was found dead in Lisbon detention center. So the main question to be asked is, and which was also the question at stake in the court trial that followed, what happened in those 48 hours? And so to answer this question and better understand the overall context in which Ihor's assassination took place, let's take a step back and look at the history and overall context of immigration detention in Portugal and its key features. And the history of detention in Portugal dates back to 1994, where detention facilities were established for people failing to comply with residency rules. 3 reasons were mainly listed as possible grounds for detention. First one, interestingly, is humanitarian reasons. Second one is security reasons. And third one is detention as a consequence of attempting to enter irregularly in the country. So as a result of this first law, in 2000, some detention facilities, 5, were created in the main Portuguese airports, Lisbon, Porto, Faro, Funchal, and Ponta Delgada. And they were complemented in 2006 by a detention centers called Centro de Instalação Temporária, Temporary Installation Center, which is this euphemism used to define detention facilities, in the city of Porto, which has the official mission to hold in dignified and human conditions people subject to a removal order. And it was defined, this center, as a second-generation center with a unique model of operation. Again, a narrative to strengthen this forward-thinking image of Portugal as humanist, progressive, welcoming country, which somehow an exceptional case in the European scenario. So I don't have the time to describe all the operation, how the center is managed and how it works, but I'm happy to ask questions if people want to. Maybe it's just important to say that detention in Portugal is up to 60 days, or in a special case can be extended to 90s. It's important to say that information on immigration detention and deportation in Portugal is particularly scant. And this is, to me, a key feature of the system. There is no public and regular information on detention. So like, for example, how many people enter detention facilities. And so my colleague, Emeline de Oliveira, and I asked for data. So we submitted a request to get some data on 2020, which was the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is what we got. So it's interesting, I think, in this table, this first set of data that they provided, to look at two particular data. First one, the data on so-called voluntary abandonment notifications, which is an euphemism used to indicate administrative expulsion orders issued by immigration authorities. So in order to force to leave the country, so people are forced to leave the country within a predetermined period of time between 10 and 20 days. And the question here is, so if Portugal, regularized all illegalized migrants in its territory, that was the narrative, right? That came up in mainstream media, and particularly international media. So how it comes that 2,182 people were subject to expulsion order only during 2020. So mine and Emily's hypothesis is that most of these people subject to expulsion order actually were never able to apply for this so-called regularization, because actually this regularization was not a true regularization, it was a temporary regularization, and only people who had submitted request to regularize their situations due to mainly working reasons before the 18th of March 2020 were actually able to get access to these temporary special protections which was created. So all the people that for obstacles, structural, institutional, systemic obstacles, were not able to submit this request, and all these people that submitted it after the 18th of March actually were did not enter in this scheme, right? Also, it's important to look at the nationalities, and you can see how here is very clear the kind of colonial legacies. So like on Brazil, Brazilian people are the large majority of people affected by border control in Portugal, and this is also true for detention. Then we have Moldova, but then all the other countries, Guinea-Bissau, Angola, and Cape Verde, are all countries which have been colonized by the Portuguese Empire. It's also noteworthy, it's also important to note that 1,589 people were refused that entry at the border, which means that they were usually detained. The majority of people was detained, although for short periods, and deported back to their countries of origin, or the countries they were traveling from. As we can see from this second set of data, the large majority of these people were detained in Lisbon detention centers, right? And often, it's interesting because in this statistic, they say like number of people detained, and we can see in Lisbon detention center is more than 1,353. But then when we look at we ask for time, so the time people were detained, if we sum up like the numbers, it doesn't, we don't get to the total. And so like the majority of people basically stayed for less than 48 hours, which means that are people that are subjected to the so-called refusal of entry. And so which means that there's no judicial scrutiny on their detention and confinement. And Ihor Igoumeniouk was one of them. So, I mean, his case is illustrative of the kind of abuse and deadly violence they can be exposed to. So going back to Heathrow, it's important to say that in his case, isolation, forced administration of sedative, handcuffing, and constrictions of the limbs with adhesive tape, this was the treatment that he was reserved as a passenger. That is the term which is used by authorities and even in the court sentence refers to him. A treatment, according to the various actors intervened, the immigration officers which were on shift on that night of the 11th of March, but also the security guards, the vigilantes guarding the center, and even the medical personnel, that was necessary to calm him down. So this chain of abuse and violence culminated in the intervention on the morning of March 12 by 3 inspectors of the SAF, so 3 immigration officers, who were especially sent to the center by their superiors to solve the problem. A passenger within the detention center was showing some to be violence, and therefore the intervention was needed to control him. The 3 officers ordered the vigilantes to not write down their names on the entry register, entered the room where Ihor was confined, a room without cameras inside, and went out after 25 minutes. And the brutality they inflicted on Ihor, who was eventually left with his hands tied behind his back, was what led him to his death from mechanical asphyxiations. And again, I don't have time to go into more details, but I'm happy to respond to questions in the Q&A on this case. I attended like the last court trial, and have been looking also at the court sentence and other court proceedings. So I'm happy to address questions or provide more information on this. But the point I want to make in these last minutes I have is that Ihor's tragic case is not an exceptional or unique as he was depicted. Indeed, for a long time, the detention of those racialized or ascribed as foreign national has been an issue completely removed from the public debate, with the exception of few peoples and groups who always denounced the existence of these violence institutions. And actually, there was some information out there, including from, for example, the National Prevention Mechanism, who had already reported in like annual reports ill treatment allegedly carried out by SAF officials during the control of entry into the national territory. However, I mean, although this information already existed and was public, the uncomfortable issue of migrant detention has been constantly raised from the public Portuguese collective consciousness. It has been erased through like this politics of eraser has been performed, has been enacted through like the lack of providing statistics. It has been enacted through the lack of providing information what happened during the COVID-19 syndemic into these sites. It has been enacted by centering the news, mainstream news around how progressive Portugal is in a welcoming country, but completely neglecting this violence. And this, to me, I think it's important to analyze this politics of erasure and silencing of state-sanctioned violence in its continuity with colonial histories and oppressions. In fact, a key feature of the Portuguese colonialism has been this tendency, according to Ricardo Roque, who's an historian, tendency to distort, deny, and invisibilize the violence associated with the Portuguese Empire. So Portuguese colonialism has often been described and narrated as an ethical colonialism, different from other forms of colonialism, because Portuguese were nicer and more friendly to colonize populations. They, used to mix up, which actually meant they used to sexually abuse women in colonized countries. So there's all this narrative of the Lusotropicalism and these softer ethical forms of colonialism, which really shifted and characterized the public discourse. And somehow this, like the same mechanism of invisibilization of state-sanctioned violence and of creation of this ecumenical, indisputable image of national exceptionalism, we can see it also in this field of border control and border violence. And it's actually what I argue is that, I mean, these two sides, which seems contradictory, are actually intentionally designed to complement each other and create a complex systems which present itself as humanist, while at the same time silencing, erasuring, extremely dehumanizing and violent practices. And I think I've finished my time. I had a few more slides here on what followed and the abolition, the so-called abolition of the SAF, and how this actually ended up being the cosmetic reforms. But maybe I can leave this for the debate if you have questions, because I want to leave space for the fellow panelists. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Francesca. I'd like to, if there is questions that are directly referring to Francesca's input, I'd like to encourage you to ask them now via the chat at best, or also if you want to unmute. And if this is not the case, we spare the questions for the general discussion at the end. And I'd like to hand over to you, Moshood. Please take the floor.
Thank you, friends. Almost everything is against me right now, but I'm here. It's 3 a.m. here, so I have to be, my family, I'll be disturbing them. I literally just came in from another conference in Washington. My plane basically landed like a couple of less than 2 hours ago. So I'm lacking sleep for almost a 4-day conference. But I wanted to be here with you all because this means a lot to me. Thank you for the invitation. This is not the way I plan to present it, but I'll try, because I didn't make my slide. I didn't make, as you can imagine, because of the other conference. But I wanted to stay with something that Francesca touched upon, which is something I was wrapping my mind around even before I traveled, was the colonial legacy. So I don't know how many of you know of where is it? Where is it? Can you see this?
Yes, we can see.
So I don't know how many of you know of this the Scramble for Africa. This is in 1884. As you can imagine, many of the European nations were having so much fun taking resources out of Africa, and because they were also in that regard killing each other, what they did was call a conference in Berlin and decide how to share the loot. You can see the major player: Portugal, Italy, Spain, Germany, Great Britain, Belgium, France. I brought this up to speak to the legacy that Francesca touched upon, because many, apart from the climate disaster that we have now, climate migration, many of the other genesis, the conflict that you have, the mass migration that you have, this is the genesis of it. This is where the legacy springs from, because what they did at this time was, when they were dividing us into regional subset of people. So I'm from Nigeria originally, and what you have is me as West African, because we were colonized by the British. I also have other people in Togo, which is also West Africa, that is also now French, because it was the French that colonized them. So there's a lot of disagreement between us as ethnic brother, kings, and then you see people scramble for the resources that is not there anymore. People started moving back and forth, back and forth. I say this to establish why people are going back and forth. And recently, I wrote a paper with Brad Olsen. Some of you might know him. What we did with this paper was we were interrogating, we were calling to action psychologists, because many African or Black migrant, Afro-Hispanic, Afro-Latina that end up here, many of them have gone through, because Europe is not as welcoming as she should be, as you can imagine. So what many people, many African migrants do is, some of them will travel close to 17 countries to get to this US border, which I'm actually researching now, the southern US border. And when they get to the border, because there's no easy access, there's no legalized way to claim anything. And so people are scrambling. I want to show another image if it's okay. These are African migrants at the US southern border. Many of the other people that we work with here find it hard to believe, because the idea is that there's no direct border between the United States and any of the African countries. So when we say, oh, there's a lot of African migrants stranded at the US-Mexican border, there's always a disagreement. This has been going on forever. But recently, because of the Haiti crisis, the earthquake, and we're able to go out and see this, you know, and this is African migrant that have traveled different countries to get here. And this is what we have. This is what we're dealing with. The problem that is very related to what we are talking about here then is, even when some of the people here in this frame that you can see leave, are able to cross this border, they end up in detention. And these are not friendly detention. This is where, if they're not sent back, they'll actually spend more than 2, 5, 3, 4 years in this detention that are here, eventually sent back to their country, where some of them face death, immediate death. So the quest, as we always call it, is now that what can we do? How can we solve this crisis? As you can imagine, it's been the most challenging, because US law, US system is way, way different. We have everything. We have Title 42 to kick people out. We have MPP. We have so many crazy, ridiculous law just to keep people out, particularly Black migrants. This is a recent photo of ICE. These men on this horse, they are called ICE. They are immigration officers. I can imagine many of the people that, this is still the southern border. As you can imagine, many of the people you see in the frame, they're crossing the border, through this water. This is called Rio Grande, I think. Many of them make the cross, you know, but so these horsemen will wait behind the bank of the river, and you can see them flogging African migrants mercilessly. Unfortunately, this is not the story with all that classification of migrants, as you can imagine, that end up at the border. Recently, we have governors of Texas busing migrants to democratic cities, you know, and again, as usual, African Black migrants are excluded from this generosity, if I can use that word. So our work here, many of what we do here is to stay on top of this and fight the fight, as many of you can imagine, and interrogate it from all angles. So I'll stop here now. Hopefully I can contribute more to the discussion later. I hope I leave enough time for Dora. I think it's Dora going next. I hope I leave enough time for Dora to, then hopefully I can contribute more during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Moshood. We really, well, thank you for being here, although the conditions are not the best, and thanks for your contribution. We hand over to Dora, and then you will enter in the discussion at the end for sure. Thanks. Dora, please go ahead. And also, Moshood, thank you, you kind of saved us time, because we really started late. So.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good late night for Moshood. So happy that you are here with us. And I hope that after this, you can fully recover and have a proper night's sleep or early morning sleep. It's a a pleasure to be here. This is an amazing conference. I would love to be there in person, but it's really an honor to be able to contribute. And thank you so much, Julia, for putting us together for this panel and for chairing the meeting. So my contribution for this panel will be based on my fieldwork in Europe. I have been since 2015 sort of following and documenting different ways of supporting and showing collaboration, solidarity with people affected by border violences across different countries. And what I will reflect here today is about the relationships that have been established, particularly by people who are also academics and who, in this process of starting solidarity and relations of allyship, started to change, to be transformed by these relationships, and in some ways reinventing possibilities of resistance. And in other ways, there's also a few pitfalls here, right? And we will reflect about those as well. So as Francesca and Moshood illustrated, in Europe, we are working with a lot of different border violences that come from different causes that come all the way from the colonialist relationships that Europe has with different countries, climate change, consequences that are also consequences of the extractivism that the global north has been undertaken with the global south. A lot of different conflicts, some of them caused by these complex geopolitical relationships and the neoliberal logics that rule our world. And so this has obviously caused a lot of increase in mobility. But this increase in mobility, as we have seen, showed by Francesca and Moshood, has led to border regimes and states of exception who were purposefully built to detain and deter people from moving. And so this at the same time has mobilized a part of civil society, and it has led in some cases to consequences for people who mobilize to contest this situation. So we also see in Europe a lot of cases where people who show solidarity are repressed themselves and have been even criminalized. So in the end, the reality and the very sad situation at the moment is that we are observing a reinforcement of the border regime, from deterrence to detention, deportation, and a huge monetary investment in the securitization of borders at all costs. And from the side of solidarity and people showing allyship, we are seeing transformations by witnessing and documenting these border violences. We also see some people trying to reinvent these solidarity initiatives so that they encompass these limitations set by the border regime. And I will particularly focus on these initiatives of activism and allyship that I have been observing. So my fieldwork took place in these different countries. I documented a lot of different individuals and collectives who were trying informal solidarity with people that they met that were affected by border violences. And they were experimenting in some ways forms of resistance to make their political claims and their allyship more visible. And so these engaged initiatives have definitely potential to produce new configurations of solidarity. But I think it's important that we see how they are created and what consequences do they have as well for the people involved. So I will focus first on my fieldwork in Sweden, where the so-called end of Swedish exceptionalism that took place in 2016 made that a part of civil society did not recognize itself in the new Swedish immigration policies that some of you may know had started to be very tight and hardened when they realized that populism was on the rise and there was a lot of resistance to welcoming more refugees after 2015. So this has made a lot of people to move away from state-led collaborative initiatives and starting their own proactive approach to solidarity. And so my interlocutors in Sweden actually draw a sort of a timeline before and after 2015. And I want to start by talking about Thelma. She's an academic I met with 56 years old. And she started engaging in this topic by becoming a legal guardian to an Afghan girl. And then, while understanding in this process all the structural dimension of the system that was in place to deter people from staying in Sweden and all the violences that they were subjected to, she decided to progressively become more involved. And this is a quote from her. I thought these things that are happening should be documented. This is happening in Sweden. This cannot be true, but it's true. I have to document this. I took advantage of my work at the university to apply for a scholarship that would help me dedicate myself to interviewing and documenting this. And so I began to create close relationships and I became an activist. I began to support with more concrete actions. So for Thelma, it was the urgency and the severity of the situations that she encountered, which created the need for a politicized action. And so she joined at first a collective of like-minded citizens who called themselves We Can't Stand It. But over time, some of the organizers preferred to establish a few institutionalized relationships with state-led initiatives, mainly for funding reasons. And so this came to a moral dilemma for Thelma, because as she says here in the second quote, I do this for a mixture of reasons, but the first reason is politics. I am ashamed of my government, and more than ashamed, I think it's horrible and cruel what is happening. I believe it's the people who make the structures, so I can't just sit around and accept the prime minister doing these things. We have to act. And so this has made Thelma to move away from this collective and try to find alternatives that would help her to deal with this moral dilemma. Another person I met in Sweden was Alina. She was also an academic, but also a lawyer, 47 years old from Sweden. And she has begun to first be acknowledging what was going on through her work pro bono with people affected by border violence in Sweden and by the policies of migration. And so she, by collecting testimonies for her legal cases, she started to understand how unfair the treatment of people was in her country. And gradually, she began a sort of network of contacts overseas. She had a lot of people that she could contact with in Afghanistan, Pakistan, in different places in Europe to help her to reinforce her position against the system and try to find ways to not only support legally, but also advocate for a change in the system. So these actions of Thelma and Alina and other academic activists in Sweden have led to a progressive engagement of networks of allyship that include people who have been affected by border violence and different people in academia and also people from civil society who engage in solidarity actions. And so in Malmo this summer, 2022, I was a witness to a sort of a creation and the settling of one development in this network, which was a political manifesto for a more humane system with freedom of movement for all. So from a situation where there were isolated individuals with facing moral dilemmas, they came to a collective endeavor that aims to together contest what is going on. And in my perception, this manifesto was also a possibility of resistance for themselves. As some of you may know, exactly this summer, there was elections in Sweden, and the party that has won includes a section or a small party of the extreme right. And so engaging in this sort of allyship also makes a space for resistance that supports people to feel that it is a collective effort that benefits everyone. So another example of these extended networks is one collective that I met in Paris, and they are called Les Amis des Suédois. So it's like the friends of people who speak Swedish in France, and basically it's formed by people who are of Swedish nationality, but they are living in France. And these are people who became interested in supporting this network that was born in Sweden. And so they created this collective at first to support people who were refused asylum or who were refused the possibility to stay in Sweden and then re-escaped into France. So when I interviewed one of the people involved, she told me that she grew up between Sweden and Paris, and she now lives there with her husband and 2 young children. She's a linguist, an academic, and works part-time. And before these events, she never considered herself as an activist at all. She was not involved in social causes, and she was not necessarily engaged in any of these things. However, at the moment, after having these experiences of hosting people, she does consider herself an activist. And she says Mahmoud, which is the first person that she hosted in her home, became the big brother of our children. He was responsible for our politicization and our sense of moral responsibility. We then opened the doors to others, and now they are the ones leading us on this path. So her reflection actually tells us that these various initiatives potentiate a transformation and make space for different understandings of collective responsibility and individual responsibility. And so it is important that we understand them as having this positive potential. However, and at the same time, I also think it's important to underline that we should be attentive to how these initiatives set themselves in terms of their goals and implications, and particularly when we talk about academia, that we refuse to engage in forms of extractivism or self-serving purposes. And I say this because I remember also listening in a recent podcast of a Dutch activist group called the Verbranders. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's quite a good one, also made by academic researchers. And in this podcast, there was one activist called Mariama Omar from a collective called We Are Here in Amsterdam. And she was exactly complaining about the multiple times academics came to her to request her participation and collaboration in research studies, and how some of them were shocked when she asked them to be compensated, because she found that it was not acceptable to just be a part of a collaboration research without being considered a partner in the research. So an example of how sometimes we can be falling into these pitfalls of extractivism and self-serving purposes when we are working with situations of differences in power and privilege. And so it's important to maintain these situations of support with a lot of reflection, with an open dialogue with collectives and civil society actors and academia, and making sure that what we are doing actually amplifies the voices of the people that we are trying to support. And as well, in this process, I think it's important that in the experimentation that we do at local level, be it with artivism, with advocacy or resistance, that we also understand this as a possibility to imagine sustainable alternatives for our future and ways of dealing with what is going on and all this violence of the border regime is something that is ours, that is everyone's, and that is our responsibility in a sort of what some research call a planetary sense of community. So those would be my conclusions, and open to more debate on this matter later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dora. It also resonates a lot with what happened today here in the conference on the hall when David Kilroy, she was saying, like, reflect on what you're doing, you as so basically critical activists, scholars, how you engage, what is your work really doing, how many people have you freed, literally. And so she really encouraged us to think about it, to reflect on it. So thank you for having already prepared the way to it. So I'm a bit bad in timekeeping, so I try to do that for myself, but please, if you notice that I'm running out of time, please advise me, because as Moshood, as you said, like, okay, it's a bit a kind of crazy day. For me, this is true as well, like being in Australia in that brilliant conference, but with a lot of, let's say, food for thought. I'm a bit kind of upside down, and I think, I hope that you can follow me or that I can explain you what I'd like to do today. So yeah. I hope that you can see my screen now and the PowerPoint presentation. Please tell me if this is not the case. Thank you. All right. So like many contributions today, they have already shown and will show tomorrow in this conference and beyond the conference, refugee camps or immigration confinement camps are constituted by entanglements of care and control. And I'm now aiming at an understanding and criticizing of care in a landscape of control and dehumanization. So I promised in the abstract a feminist encounter, like looking through the lens of care on refugees confinement camps with a classical, let's say, Dorian Massey feminist geographical perspective, seeing space not only as a kind of environment, but as a lived and social, emotional and embodied space. This means for sure also to look at fractures, at contradictions, and at what is invisibilized. So as again, feminist, I understand care as part of the landscape of social reproduction. And within materialist feminist theory, care is understood as the practice that is used to reproduce not only the everyday life, but also the effective, which is also the effective and material labor to reproduce society. So Nancy Fraser argues that there is a crisis of care, meaning the contradictions between social reproduction and capitalism and or the neoliberal attack on reproduction as the super exploitation of care. But like we should ask also, so what does care actually reproduce, and might care be part of the crisis or itself being the crisis? And in line with the Pirate Care project, I argue that the punitive state that we see also in the carceral environments of immigration detention camps, care is turned into a tool for surveying, for excluding, for punishing those who are put in the most vulnerable positions of the social stratification. So 7 hours ago in this conference, I argued that in the necropolitical camp spaces, care is turned rather into uncare, and that dehumanizing spaces emerge that attack social relations and subjectivities, and that we could tag as torturing environments. And so this means that if states are purposefully creating spaces of uncare, in these cases, spaces harm people, they have to be kind of filled up with humanitarian care. But then the question is, what kind of care is this? What kind of care could that be? So I'm kind of oscillating between care as control, a state's legal obligations towards care, torturing environments of uncare, voluntary humanitarian care, and the challenge of care work as solidarity work, as emotional and material reproduction work. So this is a lot. And the contribution, as also the contribution today in the morning, is not a single woman project, but is based on the work of many and of different political collectives and activists in Mexico, Spain, and on Samos. So yeah, coming to Samos, this is exemplary for the EU's hotspot camps in the Aegean Islands. And this contribution built on the countermappings of former detainees and also activists on Samos. The mapping portrays struggles that visibilize violence, but also that contest the violence of the camp and that contest the camp itself. So the second broader question is, are the encounters of uncare, of humanitarian care, and of finally pirate care. So yeah, we see here in Samos there has been the old camp, the so-called, which is glued to the hill of the city of Bathi, and then the new camp, the proposed multi-purpose and identification reception center, which is the server camp that you can see here, which is really remote. And I think that Lauren Martin, who is here tonight with us, and Matthew Mitchelson would probably speak of it as a remote detached geography that you can see from the airplane. And what was supposed to be an MPRIC, the Multi-Purpose Reception and Identification Center, one day before its opening became a closed controlled access center of Samos, ACCAC. So this is what we were kind of countermapping with testimonies and interviews with former camp residents and activists with a lot of different methods, but I'd like just to go into the psychogeographical countermapping, which is inspired by feminist human geographical perspective of different places and spaces. So the mapping itself could be on with pen and paper, or also like the mappings that I'm going to show you via a mirror, actually, which is maybe not the most subversive tool, but it worked. We have the map and color legends identifying emotions, physical feelings of fear and unsafety versus safety, extreme temperatures, or disgust, and icons that indicate specific events and or that indicate architectural and infrastructural conditions of the camp. So the first was just for the sake of completeness, the counter mapping of uncare in the old camp and in the new camp. And we see that I said like both environments could be named torturing or are torturing environment that purposefully harm the residents. And although the mappings are different, they are similar in the sense of Kalokoh, so saying that people are exposed to unsafety, that it creates fear, that it is spaces that create disgust, and that you can see like different actors like military, police, and securities that are actually it's G4S, in the new camp, the private security actor that runs different detention facilities all over the world, which is connected to police and security violence, arbitrary detention, and yeah. So what I'd like to show you now are 3 counter mappings from the 3 different time frames. The first is from 2016. So we see here the scale of the camp. The original map is from an adherent of the Summers Advocacy Collective. And so there you can see a person who was part of the No Border Kitchen in 2016, when the whole, like what is now today the old camp, had not been there completely. So you'd see that just the upper part of the camp had been built already. So you can see there also a double barbed wire. At that time, it was the military that was administrating the camp together with the police. And inside the camp, there were conditions of overcrowding, of poor hygiene or devastating hygienic conditions with unusable toilets, yeah, in the No Border Kitchen, you might know them. They have a solidarity activism in the face of the torturing environment, which means not only to cook for thousands of people that were there at the time, but also to, and this is the scale of the islands, also of the city, sorry, to drive to the police station when people were detained, but also driving to places of the islands when there had been boat arrivals and providing shelter for people who came. So this was the moment when care as solidarity care, receiving people, providing people not only with food, but also with information, was not yet completely criminalized. And when I asked this person who then left the island in 2016 in March together with the whole No Border Kitchen, because they were kind of working in really precarious conditions, also being managed by the military and having really reduced means, being few people. They finally left, and the camp became suddenly a closed camp. The military closed it. Food was only provided within. And so the friend, he was like leaving the island also with the bad feeling of having left the people behind, exposed to the violence of the military, and had like repercussions of trauma. So kind of that that they were experiencing repercussions of trauma. So the question is also like, who cares for the carers then? And now we jump to 2020. This was shortly before the transition from the old camp to the new camp. The person who mapped it was part of a soup kitchen. They didn't really know the camp so well, but they hadn't the need to do it because the people were allowed to move freely in the city, and came right to the soup kitchen. So countering the camp was providing food, which was not only food as a mean, but also food as dignity, as a means of social relations that fosters and is reciprocal in a way. So there at the scale of the city, we see that suddenly while before there were really few humanitarian actors, suddenly, let's say, the whole city is filled by NGOs, which is nice, but at the same time, knowing that the camp, the old camp would be closed and the new camp was already built, also, well, at first, a different residents had gotten suddenly permission to leave the island, while before people had been stuck for years. Also, a huge part of what Dijsselbloem and Van der Veer say, name the moving masses of the humanitarian border, moved away from the island. And so the remaining mainly 400 people were afraid to be locked up in the new camp without anyone seeing them, given the remoteness of this new camp that you had seen. And who also remained was actually the police and all the state actors, while the humanitarian actors didn't have any legal obligation to be there and kind of withdrew for different reasons. So now we jump again to 2022, after the opening of the CCAC, and what we suddenly see that the scale is not, it's not the scale of the camp anymore or of the city together, but if you think camp and city or camp and care together, which is external care from political actors, you have to scale it up. And so this person is part of a legal collective providing legal information and trying to also aim at litigation cases. But what happened was that suddenly their legal activism was hindered due to the remoteness of the camp. Everything, energy, resources, time was kind of put into just bridging the distance, the physical distance from the camp. So there, with that flash, you can see that they try to do remote consultations via internet, but couldn't really provide a safe surrounding, as people who were in consultation calls with them were suddenly interrupted by security guards or were kind of surveyed by cameras. So as they couldn't provide a safe environment in that camp, again, everything was aimed at getting in touch with people. And this was also a situation in which solidarity activism that helped people beyond humanitarian care was or is still criminalized. So giving people food or water after arrivals would have been criminalized with the charge of human trafficking. So people were really or are really careful what or how to approach people who are illegalized and on the move. So this is what they kind of were struggling, criminalization, but also the mere physical distance, geographical distance of the camp. Yeah, so what I did not refer to is care work, which is done inside the camp, but from residents for one another, which was not my perspective, but rather trying to how to bridge these barriers. Yet it really, the scenario is not one that is permitting optimism. Yeah, and so what do we do with that? Saying okay, we have the systematization of uncare, which is producing torturing environments, and which in a way makes humanitarian care necessarily. But if we want abolition, then we cannot legitimize campsites via care, providing care. So as the No Border Kitchen was asked by the military to come into the camp and cook there, they said, no, we won't do that. So if we do kind of care and or reproduction work, what kind of camp or what kind of system do we reproduce? Do we stabilize the system of the camp or change or challenge it? And what about if the criticism would be if we only repair the harm of the camp, which is then we don't really attack the camp itself, but is having people out, getting people out of the camp, even if it's only for some hours, and some post-colonial scholars would say like, yeah, the mere existence is resistance, then wouldn't it also be kind of part of invisible resistance to get people out? The next question would be, who cares for the carer? So if we say it's about solidarity, how could we kind of, build networks broader as anti-repression networks maybe? And this would be pirate care probably. So the pirate care project aims at like finally everything that we do to maintain, continue and repair our world. All relations that maintain the world so that humans and non-humans live in it as well as possible, which also means to, for sure, like recognize the need for political conditions of the camp and trying to abolish them because there is no other answer. Okay, thank you. Okay. Please, Charly, Aminata, Francesca, I think you are there of the collective, right?
Yes.
I'd like to hand the floor over to you. Please decide who is starting. And thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much. Just trying to share my screen. Sorry, just taking a few seconds.
No worries.
Okay, now. Okay.
Perfect.
There we go. Can you all see it?
Yes,
The
perfect.
presentation. Okay. So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for having us. It's great to be here. My name's Charly. I'm currently a master's student at the LSE and I'm studying human rights and politics. And I'm here with Aminata. She having technical.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sorry. I've had to switch on to my phone. Yeah, my name is Aminata. I'm currently working with a small charity that facilitate visitor groups that go into detention centers. And it's also, it will also be interesting to know that I have got a lived experience of detention, so I know how it feels being in there. Yeah, pass it over back to Charly.
So we're going to be talking about our project, which aims to use animation as a tool to expose the violence of the detention regime. The project is a participatory action research project, which brings together researchers, activists, students, and people directly affected by detention and border violence. And for us, this is an ongoing experiment of how solidarities can take shape and become materialized in common projects to advance transformative abolitionist changes. Our goal is to contribute to collective efforts to challenge and dismantle the detention and deportation regime. These efforts are enacted on an ongoing, everyday basis by people inside and outside of UK detention facilities. Since not all of you might be familiar with the UK immigration system, I'm going to give you a brief overview. Okay, so there are currently 7 immigration removal centres in the UK, and the newest addition is Derwentide, which is in County Durham. This opened in November 2021, and it is a new women-only immigration removal centre, and it has 84 spaces. There are also 2 residential short-term holding facilities, as well as several holding rooms run by Border Force in ports and airports and at reporting centres across the country. And people are also detained in prisons under immigration powers. Now, briefly, some statistics. So in the year ending March 2022, over 25,000 people entered detention. This is nearly double the number of the previous year. And only 14% of those detained were removed from the UK, 85%, so the rest were returned into the community. There were 20 cases of prolonged detention, and the longest was a man who was detained for 1,391 days, so for more than 3 years. There were also 5 pregnant women detained in this period. That is down from 7 in 2021 and 20 in 2020, so this number is decreasing. But the detention of women, and especially pregnant women, has attracted particular criticism. The UK Home Office policy states that pregnant women may be detained only if removal is imminent or there are exceptional circumstances to justify detention. In 2016, a 72-hour time limit on detention of pregnant women was established, although this can be extended to a maximum of 7 days if authorized by a minister. At the end of March 2022, 1,440 people were in detention, of whom 621 were in prison. Prison detention is still a major overlooked part of the detention estate. These statistics demonstrate that the UK government is going back to business as usual in its approach to immigration detention from prior to the pandemic in 2019. The increasing use of immigration detention is a worrying upward trend, including the detention of vulnerable people without adequate support or consideration of alternatives. Now I'm going to briefly move on to women in the detention system. So in 2020, only 7% of all people detained under immigration powers were women. And there is little understanding of women's experiences, needs, and challenges in immigration detention. In this sense, women can be seen as a silenced custodial population. And most studies in the field also adopt a male-centric gaze, which overlooks women's experiences. Sorry. The UK's increasingly punitive immigration law and policy landscape has the effect of extending and compounding violence against migrant women rather than ensuring protection. Structures of coercive control set forth by the state and often enacted by its corporate allies. And coercive control is the banal everyday stripping of autonomy and humanity that occurs throughout the process of seeking asylum in the UK, entrenched in coercive interactions in an increasingly restrictive and controlling landscape. And I think Canning hits the nail on the head with these quotes. So the detention environment mirrors the environments of domestically violent perpetrators, and they work gradually to corrode women's autonomy and indeed sense of safety. There have also been allegations of sexual violence against Serco staff, one of the companies running the IRCs. And these allegations were made towards Serco staff in Yarlswood, which previously was the main immigration detention facility for women. Sorry, I'm a bit under the weather, I'm really sorry. The majority of detained women report experiences of gendered violence, including sexual, domestic, and/or reproductive violence. Furthermore, many women highlighted how the experience of detention itself reactivated the gender traumas they suffered in the past, thus compounding their suffering. Some women Francesca interviewed also traced the similarity between the mechanisms at play in gender-based violence, particularly domestic abuse, and the ones used in detention. For instance, a woman told Francesca how the sound of the staff steps in the corridors at night and the jingle of the keys they brought with them reminded her of when her abusive partner used to lock her up in a room for days. Notably in detention, women are also locked up at night in their rooms. And this is a quote from Berta. So she told Francesca, yeah, I feel like, you know, I went through a lot in my life. Sometimes they're walking in the nighttime with keys. That reminding me of my past. When I was broken inside the room, you know, sometimes I can't sleep at the nighttime because it's like it's bringing me in my past. So even victims of torture are not always offered humanitarian protection because the UK immigration regime believes that they can be safe in their country of origin if they physically, like geographically distance themselves from the places where they were harmed. And detention in the UK is indefinite and you don't know how long you will be there. Immigration detention harms, and there is no, like I said, time limit. For time reasons, we can't go through this now, but we're happy to answer any questions in the Q&A. And now I'm going to hand over to Aminata.
Thank you. Thank you, Charly. So, yeah, we're moving on to the.
Sorry.
Okay.
Was it this one?
Yeah.
There we go.
So as a team, we decided to come together to work on a project, which is more to give out information out there to get people to be more aware of the experiences that people face in detention centers. Charly, I can't. Do you wanna share the screen? I can't see. It's like
yes, I'm so sorry. I'm really bad with technology.
That's fine. So we decided to bring people together from different positions and capacities. So people that worked in charities, people with lived experience of detention, and other organizations, all working towards fighting towards the same cause, which is to end the detention estate. And where our project is particularly interesting is the fact that we felt there was a need to represent the voices of those with lived experience of immigration, and we thought other areas needed conscious attention. With the UK's political climate becoming more and more toxic, for those that are stuck within the immigration system, with far-right groups and medias giving a one-sided information about immigrants, about asylum seekers and things like that, we felt it was necessary to bring something up that would change the narratives and to powerfully convey the actual experiences of people in these centers. Say, for example, we've had their narratives where asylum seekers are being placed in hotels and the mainstream media are producing such information as these asylum seekers are living in luxuries, whereas a lot of these hotels that are being used are actually abandoned hotels. And the state in which people are in there are even worse than being in detention centers itself. So we thought there is a need to change that narrative. And we also felt by using the tool, we could offer the general public another way of engaging in championing human rights and offering solidarity as a vital step in challenging the hostile environment. So storytelling in itself is a powerful tool and it can be transformative So we need to work in solidarity to find ways or craft ways of telling these stories together by mutual learning and engagement. And going back to the example that Dora gave about Mariama Umar, it is also important that in the fight and in the mutual engagement of telling these stories, that we do not seek to own these stories as ours, but rather to let the people with the experience own their story and tell it as it is. So in that case, we felt to reflect on the gender violence of women in detention, we decided to do a short animation about a lady called Hope, obviously not her real name, to kind of highlight some of these experiences that reflect exactly what Hope was actually running away from. So we'd like to share this short trailer that represents where we've gone so far. And we hope that in the future, at the end of the whole animation video, we'll be able to share it out and get as wide a population to watch it and realize that not everything that the mainstream media seek to represent is actually what is happening. Yeah, go ahead, Charly.
Yeah,
should we get to go? Thank you.
There we go. I hope you can all hear it.
No, we can't hear it, Charly.
Okay.
Probably.
What if I try this? No. What about now?
Yeah, perfect. But
You think about being deported and being taken back to the sort of men you've been running away from. Most of us here in detention have gone through domestic violence. I feel like you're just like someone who is in a coffin alive, just can't breathe.
Yeah, we seem to have had a bit of a technical issue there. I don't know if Francesca, if you want to try from your end, I can because I'm using my phone.
Yeah, I can. One sec. Okay.
And maybe meanwhile, I hope Ian and Lauren, who are still there, please feel very welcome to stay with us for 15 or 10 more minutes of discussion, and don't feel obliged to leave. Like Lauren, she already had to head over to the next session, but yeah. So then let's have a second look at your collective video.
You think about being deported and being taken back to the sort of men you've been running away from. Most of us here in detention have gone through domestic violence. feel like you're just like someone who is in a coffin, alive, just can't breathe.
I hope it.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, thank you for sharing, Francesca. So that is just the trailer. We're hoping to have the full animation video out soon, and we would count on all of you to help us to share that out, to disseminate the information, so people are aware that it is much worse than they think it is, and we all have to come into solidarity in fighting against such harmful effect of detention. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to you, Aminata and Charly and Francesca. And yeah, so would you like to, I think, learn also, thank you for attending, has to leave. So we're a bit like among us. Would you still like to discuss? Moshood, for instance, I'd like to hear you again if you want to, but yeah, what do you prefer? So now I think we can talk freely as long as they won't publish the record, but they won't, so I make that sure. Thank you everyone also for your patience, for the technical issues, and
Thank you, Julia, for coordinating the panel. You have done a fantastic job, and thank you so much for setting everything up.
I feel rather disoriented, but I think you did a pretty good job, and so thank you. Yeah, but how are you? How do you feel? Would you like to discuss something?
Yeah, from my side, I just want to thank everyone. It was really very good to hear everyone. Amazing presentations. Really looking forward to see this animation. Very good job, guys. Yeah, I think it was, considering all the time differences and people scattered around the world, the tiredness, the sickness that some of us are still recovering from. I think we did good. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, or let's maybe, I think we all have really busy lives and everything, but maybe we could just schedule in the group a meeting. I'd like, well, if you like, so I'd like also to digest. Francesca, yeah, thank you for, we could talk about piracy care. I think it's a great idea of kind of how care can be solidarity, challenging, aiming at a better world, but knowing that it's kind of operating in illegalized spaces, or in this, I think they say like gray shades of the law or something like that, saying like piracy is care and care is piracy. But yeah, would you prefer that too? So Moshood, you could go to get some sleep, and we just try to connect for a later moment in our lives.
Yeah, we can debrief for sure later, because we're also planning biannual anyway, so we're all going to see for those that are coming out here and have more time to talk in a non-confinement space. But thank you all for having me. As you can see, my voice is cracking up, but I can't sleep now because my kid will be up soon and I have to help them. So anyway, but thank you all. Thank you all. Aminata, we miss you at the last stop, but I hope you're feeling better.
Yeah, much better.
I can't wait to see the animation too. Certainly we need something like that. Many people like visualization, right? So, you know, maybe that will help more.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we would love when we have maybe next year that we kind of advance a little bit more. We have like a longer video ready with it's like based on the storyboard, and we are really trying to get feedback as much as possible. So the process has been like not completely straightforward and more circular, but because we shared it with people on the ground, activists, and particularly people with lived experiences to then get feedback and change and rethink some parts of animation. So, I mean, if you want, you're interested, we would love early next year to maybe set up a session in which we share, like, with more time and more details, the animation. We're all storyboards, so not just the trailer. Obviously, it's really short, but it's 10 minutes animation. So share the overall project, the longer video, and get your feedbacks would be amazing.
If when it's ready, if you can tell me, we're looking for a program for scribe migrant justice. So we can make it like an event where you guys come and talk about that to our member, you know. But when it's ready, let me know. We can plan that ahead.
Okay, that'll be good.
Yeah, thank you. That would be amazing.
Okay. Then sending you hugs to.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
care.
you.
Bye.
Yeah, see you all
Bye.
soon.
Take
Merry
care.
Christmas if we don't get to
Quickly,
see you before then.
Dora, quickly, I told Bayo, I said, he has as usual, I said he has an admirer in, I told him about you while we were talking last night, that you said you are a fan, you appreciate his work across the world.
Oh,
So he sent his regard.
Oh my God, amazing. Thank you so much, Moshood. I love Bayo. I read everything he writes, and I think he's really a very inspiring person. Thank you so much for that. Thanks.
No problem. No problem.
All right. Bye-bye.
Yes. Bye.
Bye. Take care.